Uh, Welcome back to Rooted in Rising, everyone, the podcast where we talk about real things, have real conversations with real people, and really are rooted in growth and healing. Today, I am super excited to have my wonderful guest, Dr. Jeremy Hollander, with me today, an Antioch University graduate like myself, and who is just absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Hollander, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So a little bit about Dr. Hollander. He is an educator, a scholar, an advocate, works in trying to dismantle systemic inequalities, is a veteran, folks, and is committed to self-reflection and accountability. Dr. Hollander, welcome, welcome, welcome. And I always like to start by letting our audience know who you are and who you are behind the credentials. So tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of what you do, and things like that.
Is it okay if I start with, is when I'm meeting with clients, so do like the consult, and I always have like a 30-second, is it okay if I start with that?
Do it. Do your thing.
I always start with, I was a high school dad, and so then I joined the military afterwards, became a Navy hospital corpsman, and served 12 years. I usually start with that because it highlights that I was in EMT, worked in Oakland for a little bit, and then I worked in clinical medicine and also field medicine. I did serve mostly with Marine Corps units. And then after a tour in Iraq in 2003, part of that invasion, I was medically retired. And I spent a year sort of self-destructively figuring things out, and spent a period of time as a practicing Buddhist, lived homeless for a little bit, and then started to kind of redefine my life after getting connected to habitat restoration, which is a form of ecotherapy that I really am just deeply connected to, and that led to becoming a therapist, and that led to me being here. So that's me in a nutshell.
I love that. I love that. Could you explain a little bit about what did you say? Habitat
restoration. Yeah.
Restoration. There we go. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Habitat restoration is focused on, like, we live in Snohomish County, and there's a lot of urban development, especially in King County around Seattle and so on. A lot of disruptive soil. And so what happens is a lot of times invasive, like we would call them weeds, invasive species would take root. They'll overgrow, outcompete native plants, and then just push everything out, creating monocultures. And habitat restoration is an act of restoration, in kind of some ways restorative justice, because we're hoping to kind of restore the land to what it was before human development. Removing invasive species, installing native plants, and helping to reintroduce biodiversity to ecosystems.
That's beautiful. And I say this in jest, but I will not even talk to you about my front yard right now and how just look at it. I mean, it's just a sad little thing. It's so sad. The sun beams on it, and nothing is growing there. But, I may talk to you about just restoring the grass.
Right.
Restoring the grass for a second. Oh, geez. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for what you do and who you are. That's totally okay. You know what? Like I tell folks, my cat will make an appearance at some point. I don't know where she is. I have no idea. But you talked a little bit about, your background and sort of what led you here. And the title of today's episode is Looking in the Mirror, Self-Reflection, Accountability, and the Systems That Shape Us. And I think this is just going to be a really, really powerful discussion. And I can't wait for folks to hear what you have to say and your own journey in self-reflection, because I think this is something we might be lacking just as an overall country right now, right? That self-reflection and that looking inward and trying to figure out who we are and how we can restore and repair, just, with one another, repair the earth and what have you. Was there a defining moment for you that changed how you viewed systems of power and inequality and got you to a place of self-reflection?
I would Yes, and so it's kind of like a stepping stone moment, I guess. In the military for 12 years. What's really interesting is, it's coming up in the 90s, and you can see police brutality, especially with Rodney King and the
Yes.
aftermath of that, how those police officers, how it happened.
Yeah.
And you can see just the gross inequality there and how people are treated.
Yeah.
Being in the military, and please forgive me for the dog in the background.
That's all right. That's all right.
Great timing.
Dog's got something to say.
Everyone's voice should be heard, right?
Yes, everyone's voice. Yes. Can't understand, but
yeah,
should be heard.
Should be heard. Thank you. And but what was really interesting for me is being in the military. Bremerton at the Naval Hospital. They're working, getting off work one night, and there's two military police vehicles who pulled over a friend of mine, a colleague who just happened to be Black. And so they had to have two cars there with them. If it were me, it would have been just one person if I had gotten pulled over. And so I could see I could see the inequality with that as well. I served on a ship. I didn't serve on the ship. I was there for like 10 days as we floated from San Diego to San Francisco. And on that vessel, I could see the segregation, the self-segregation that, different communities, the Filipino community and so on.
With each other.
Yes. And so it's always conscious of increasingly becoming conscious of the role of racism in the United States. But I was just scratching the surface. Fast forward a little bit, and then coming to the invasion in Iraq, that was the moment for me. Because there you can see imperialism in force, colonialism in force, and just the human wreckage that stays with me today, and it reformed my moral bearing, and it drastically changed the course of my life. So I guess that defining moment is an obligation to honor the memory of those who no longer have a voice and who would otherwise be forgotten. And that's why I do what I do.
And thank you for what you do. And I will say, as a person who, identifies as Black, and I made this joke before, Blackish, because I'm Black and Filipino. Allies matter, and breaking, I think, that color line and having these really, I want to say they're difficult. They are difficult conversations that all of the sides have to come at and approach and really work through. And so while these are very just, like heinous acts, and individuals have definitely suffered and are still suffering, I extend my thanks to you for doing this work and for being compassionate and, taking the time to learn about all these different communities and sort of how these inequalities come to the surface. And, we often hear words like systemic oppression and privilege and colonialism and imperialism, like you said, and institutional inequality. I'll learn to speak today. For many people, those terms feel really overwhelming or threatening. But my question is, like, if we were to deconstruct that for a second, what do we actually mean by systems? What are these systems? What is systemic oppression? What does this mean?
Yeah, and I guess there's a lot of answers to this. I always, because it came up in medicine, the first system I became conscious of was the body systems, all the systems that make us who we are, the circulatory system, nervous system, and so on and so forth. But we have an internal system, and we have external systems as well. Our families are systems, our schools are systems, our classrooms are, and so on and so forth. And so really, when we're talking about systems, to my understanding, it's just the quality of interactions, the patterns that repeat within society. And as we're talking about colonialism or imperialism, capitalism, and so on, racism, these are the patterns of pain that have been repeated generation after generation after generation by people in power. And so when we're talking about that, it is big and it is overwhelming and it is scary. And so then I guess it's important just to, like you're talking about, really just breaking it down so that we can start to, this is where we begin to see our part in the big picture. And it does start with us. And so I'm rambling. I feel like I'm rambling.
No. This is great. No.
It just feels like we do have to start with ourselves first, and then we can really start to pay attention to the bigger stuff. But if we don't understand the fact that we're participating in systems of oppression, especially as a member of the white delegation, then how in the hell can I have conversations? And earlier we were talking about having the same conversations over and over again. And that's something I've experienced in being in a liberal arts education from that institution. And it's like, we're having the same conversations over and over again.
Damn conversation.
And members of the white delegation, my apologies for repeating that, but we're patting ourselves on the back because we're so liberally minded. And to me, that's a danger, because we're too busy to
talking about it. I feel and not doing anything about it.
To use a South Park reference, we're too busy smelling our own farts with our smugness, thinking we're all these great people, but we're really just part of the problem.
And I couldn't agree more. And I think it goes with all sides, right? We are all both actively and I think inactively reinforcing this systemic oppression, and I don't think it necessarily comes from one side alone. But I also do think that there are different levels of accountability.
Yes.
So I don't give any of us an out when it comes to this. And it is a really hard conversation to broach, especially when, like me as a woman and a person of color, my experiences are very different from like yourself, as you say, like of the white delegation, right? And at the same time, there are shared themes, whether they're connected by oppression or prejudice and what have you, that we do share just as humans, and we need to talk about those. But you said something that was really interesting, talking about that accountability, and it starts with us reflecting and knowing that we are part of the problem. And I think one of the issues that I have run into is trying to explain systemic inequality to folks without them feeling as if I'm blaming them or as if they're being blamed for all the issues. How can we help people understand systemic equality without them victimizing themselves and saying, well, it wasn't me, I didn't contribute to the problem?
As you ask the question, there's like 1,000 different voices.
Right?
Part of me is like angry, and we need to call people out, and that sort of thing. But that's the problem, right? Because that only reinforces the barriers that already exist. And so then how do we break that down? And I always come back to, this is one of the great things about our field in counseling psychology or psychology. The idea of unconditional positive regard is so massively important. Because what's really interesting about that is a lot of times therapists look at it as like that's their professional veneer. They put that mask on, and here's my client, and I'm thinking the best of my client. And then we, are outside of the office, and then we take the veneer off, and then we're just normal people again. But the practice of unconditional positive regard has to start with us first before it starts with anybody else. We have to care enough about ourselves to push ourselves to learn about who we are and the lessons that we've learned in our life. And then once we're able to do that, then it's like nothing can touch us, right? All the stuff, all the, the insults, whatever they might be, or the accusations, or the connections to our parts in the big systems, they're no longer a threat because we're grounded with who we are. I mean, I don't know. Does that make any sense? Because it feels like it starts there. And then once we're cool with ourselves, then we can be cool with everything else and start to really build and grow from that point.
I also think too, like the concept of being cool with yourself. I think that sometimes that there are people that are too cool with themselves,
For sure.
right? For sure. Which is like, I think the lesson here is also always remain teachable.
Yes.
But I think with that, I think perhaps that there are people that have a false sense of being cool with themselves, right? There's this sort of inherent unrest. And I think those are the folks that I think I really want to speak to, where, I think it's being called out is very hard. I've been called out on several things and I'm like, okay. And I think it's what you do with that information and how you choose to move forward, right? And this is a very, very sensitive, sometimes even taboo subject, talking about inequality, because there are some people that just don't believe that this exists.
Yeah.
And that's really hard, right? It's really hard for us as people of color, for us as marginalized groups, for allies. It's hard for us to penetrate that sort of thought box and have those real educational, groundbreaking conversations, because I think the precursor to that is the buy-in. And I think that's that's been a struggle of mine, outside of the constant feeling of having to just, or need to educate people, and the pure exhaustion, from all of it. But understanding in that self-reflection, in that being cool with yourself, this sort of leads to my next sort of thought here, the recognition that there are certain groups that benefit from these systemic inequalities, but are also experiencing hardships. Like we have to sort of balance those two things, right? I can't even tell you, this is real life example. I've had someone that had said to me, Dr. Max, I totally understand what you're going through, because, as a Black person, because I grew up poor. And I'm like, whoa, hold up. Whoa, cool it there. They're not inherently the same, and they are both hardships. They're both, and being Black is not a hardship. However, what can come with being Black can be, those experiences can be. So how do we help someone recognize, and maybe how have you helped? How did you see this yourself, your own self-reflection? What did that look like? Because I'm sure that's hard.
And it was years and the kind of wrestling with that dichotomy, right? And a family member once said, is when it was as the social vernacular started to change to the idea of privilege, white privilege, and a family member said to me, is like, well, we grew up poor, and we don't have any privileges and all this other stuff, and there's this lack of, because of those lived realities or those lived experiences, we have a blind spot. And because all we're focusing on in that regard is our own suffering, and we're not conscious of other people's suffering. And for some folks, it feels like they just don't have the capacity for that understanding of other people's suffering. So they see themselves as on an equal playing field because they live in one quality of oppression. And it's true. It's there. That's oppression. So there it is. But it's so much bigger than that. And so as I was sitting with that person's statement, and as we're having smug conversations in school and just interacting with folks and paying attention, when it came time for me to earn this doctorate, my dissertation was a critical autoethnography, which was an evaluation of myself and the systems, all the lessons that I've learned, how I've privileged from systemic oppression, how I've been harmed by it, and just how I've come to be who I am today. So it really, it tasked me to dissect all the qualities that make me who I am, all the qualities that I see as favorable and all the ones that I don't, and everything in between. And it helped me form a new relationship with myself. And really, when I talk about being cool with oneself, that's what it's like, having this complete understanding of who we are from a critical perspective. We can't be all like inflating our egos and like, no,
Right.
it's like writing that autobiography, you know, it's like they just
Mm-hmm.
write the narrative as they see fit. And
Yes.
it's never really authentic, you know,
Yeah.
and so I wanted to be brutally honest with myself through that process, and I think that's what it boils down to is we have to be able to one acknowledge our pain, but also we have to look at how our pain contributes to the pain of others.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because there's this like dichotomy. I think Paulo. I always murder his last name. Paulo Freire had this discuss this dichotomy between the oppressor and the oppressed, and
Mm-hmm.
as he's having this dialogue, there's something that really stood out to me, and it was one that the oppressor can never be seen as human because they're evil in
Mm-hmm.
effect, and the oppressed are never seen as human because they're seen as lesser than by the oppressor, and
Mm-hmm.
that led to this idea that, well, there's a pathology here. The pathology of the perpetrator. There's an illness that
Yeah.
the oppressor is. Oh, I'm sorry. As I
That's
start
okay.
to say this, I recognize that this kind of like teetering on a sensitive topic in
That's
this
okay.
regard,
That's okay.
and this is where accountability comes in, because in our systems of oppression, I've been harmed by that. But
Yeah.
it's not about victimizing myself or
Yeah.
saying, "Oh, poor me."
Mm-hmm.
Um, once I'm conscious of, and this is true for psychology, right? Once we're conscious of
Yeah.
the behavioral pattern, then we need to take steps to fix it. So we
Yeah.
go to the root cause of it, and then we work on the interventions that make a difference. And I feel like I'm veering off topic,
No. 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 No.
but
No.
from my perspective, uh, in our pain, we're hurting others, and we're not
Yeah.
conscious of the root cause of the issue. And that
Right.
is the systemic oppression. Those are
Yeah.
the patterns of behavior that are hurting people generation after generation after generation. And if we look at politics today, and please forgive me for going off on a tangent,
No,
we can
that's
see
okay.
our elected officials who are grossly pathologized, who are
Yep.
grossly sick, and they don't see it that way. But the
No.
problem is that their pathologies are hurting everybody else.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so it's not so much of looking at people as good or bad, or and I feel like this is important coming back to unconditional positive regard, because if once
Yeah.
we see things for as it really is, we look at the systemic pathologies, then we can come up with community-based interventions that really
Yeah.
help solve the problem and stop having the same conversations over and over again, and actually
Exactly.
fix the ish.
Exactly. Exactly. You know what? I don't think you were tangential at all. I think it really, but I really think just your working experience in just this conversation shows the complexity of the work that is being done, needs to be done, should have been done.
Should have been, yeah.
Definitely should have been done, right?
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely right. Like, you also can be harmed by this, right? Especially if you have not deliberately, right? And I don't even know that I'm convinced by deliberately, not deliberately, whatever. But you haven't come from a deliberate model of like racism or oppression and putting that out there in an overt way. But some of the messaging, some of the things that you see, I mean, we are all affected by everything that goes on around us. We're affected by education. We're affected by the interactions that we have with people. We're affected by, financial institutions. We're affected by different psychological schools of thought and their inclusion and exclusion. And so I think you're spot on in self-reflection actually requires pre-work.
Yeah.
It requires pre-work. It requires work. It requires post-work. Like, this is a whole longitudinal study that needs to happen, I think, at the individual level in a like a dyadic way. And then also, we expand that to like the masses. And to your point, I think I'm trying to wrap my mind around my thoughts with this one. We keep having educational conversations, and we're not having we are lacking action steps even at the micro level, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is where harm continues, right? It's not that we are making zero effort, or that those of us who even having those same conversations doesn't necessarily mean it's inherently bad, but it's also not necessarily going anywhere if
Yeah.
we're all preaching to each other. And the one thing I know and that I've experienced about the our community in like education and as clinicians is sometimes we talk to each other as opposed to putting that information out there and leading with an action, a call to action. And it's super frustrating.
It's super frustrating. And it feels like what you're touching base on is that the one of the core problems, one of the core challenges that we're facing, it's how embedded we are in within the system of oppression. It's like, in the academic space, we're educators, and so then we're teaching students, and then we hold them to these academic rigors, the idea of academic rigor, while we may or may not be following up on our own. Anyway, so there might be some hypocrisies there, but
Yeah,
the idea is the academic rigor. Where the shit, excuse my language, is that
that's
coming
okay.
from? It's
Yeah,
coming from systemic oppression. And we're
yes,
defining ourselves based off of the oppressor's definition of who we're supposed to be. And
yeah.
even though we get, and my apologies for going off on a tangent again, but even though we
No,
have letters behind our names, that's effectively showing up for the oppressor. And
yeah,
in my mind, that's part of the problem. And it's like, we gotta start finding a way to break that down and define things for ourselves, because we're just still playing the game. And
yeah, yeah.
anyway, my apologies for going off on that tangent, but it
Please,
feels like
please don't apologize, because I think you're speaking to so many points. Because um, I think I 100% agree with this, especially when there is a mass underrepresentation of people of color in our field doing our work. It's at the top of their tier. I can tell you, I definitely, and I will call myself out on this. I know that um, while I am affected, and I have experienced being affected by systems of oppression, on the opposite side, I also know that being situated where I am very privileged. And I want to acknowledge that too, right? So white people can be hurt by systems of oppression, and people of color can also experience privilege. And so it's a complicated arcane ball of fun, as Leslie Knope would say in Parks and Rec, and I think it's nasty to untangle.
it's nasty to untangle, and it really does come back to, again, the unconditional positive regard piece, because this is, one of the what I find fascinating about this, as I'm working with clients, one of the pervasive lessons I've learned from each of my clients is how much pain has been caused by how they've been treated by other people. And a
Mm.
lot of the messaging that we inherit, generation after generation, is this criticism, the critique, the anger, the frustration, the voicelessness. We talk about love, but we're a culture that's defined by violence
Yes.
and human suffering, and
Mm-hmm.
and we're enacting that in almost every quality. If someone isn't wearing the right clothes on a day, it's like there's a critique. We were
Yep.
talking about the military experience and how critical that community can be, and
Yeah.
dehumanizing in so many realms. And so then all of a sudden, the clients that we're working with, they have this internalized,
Yeah.
they've internalized it all, and that's
Where do
how
they
they
go
view
with it?
themselves. Yeah. So then, okay, so how do we break that down? How do we break down that big ball of fun? And we really do have to start with love and empathy, and
Yeah.
and untangling the messaging and rewriting the narrative, so that we can empower ourselves to do things differently. And that's one of the frustrating qualities about this work, because I want to see systemic oppression burn, like, period, point blank.
Yeah.
And I'm not afraid to say that in any way, shape, or form. But I also recognize that it's probably not going to happen in my lifetime. And that is
Yeah.
heartbreaking, but it
Yeah.
does have to start somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And even being a person who represents the BIPOC community, um and the work that I do and trying to be representation, or one person, representation of the field. I don't think I'll see it in my lifetime, either. And we're working on parallels, just trying to do work maybe from different angles of the boat, and we need that, right? But talk to us about some of the experiences in your own self-reflection about how these systems harm these marginalized groups, so harm communities of color, harm disabled communities, individuals in the LGBTQ plus community, immigrants, anyone that's been othered. What have you seen? What have you experienced? How has that impacted you? And how has that contributed to your own self-reflection and growth?
A complicated question.
Sorry, I do that.
No, but it's an important question. And at the moment, I'm reflecting on hundreds of years of systemic racism and the industry of enslavement of the Black community, and colonialism, and how many scores of people who have been murdered and displaced, and I'll call it deculturalized, and through the eras, as the United States has grown, it's interesting because post-civil rights movement, right? We feel like, oh, we went through a period where we were like, I don't see color, everything's fine and dandy, everything's good to go, and
that colorblindness is a trip.
It's a trip, but at the core of all of that, through the legacies of pain that that systems of power have my ancestors have caused, and even I have, to some extent, has persisted because we've not held ourselves accountable to the pains that have been caused. And we're afraid to hold ourselves accountable now. And we see that today as they roll back all the contributions from the Black community, just as one example. And they're removing names from lists. They're removing contributions. They're removing notable figures from our parks. They're just trying to erase Black history, and all the contributions the Black community has made in building this country and what it is today, and all the things that we see great. We have stolen cultural identity from the Black community. We've taken from the Black community in so many different ways and made it our own. And so as we talk about like how have we harmed communities of color, we've harmed them by invalidating, by stealing, by ignoring, minimizing, actually physically hurting folks. And we've never once held ourselves accountable. And that's a lasting legacy of pain that continues because we're hiding from our truth.
Yeah. And, even historically, and I can speak just a little bit, to the Black experience and Black people in this country, coming over on slave ships and having our names changed, our religion changed. We were not we were not originally part of Christianity, right? And having our culture stripped, like I said, our language stripped, the things that made Africans proper Africans. So there's this, I've heard many a time, if you don't like it here, go back to Africa. I'm like, I've never been to Africa. And honestly, it's come to the point where I think I have my elevator speech for how to respond to that, because it's like, had you not dragged my ancestors out in the first place and displaced us and placed us in a place where we also were unable to thrive, maybe there'd be somewhere to go back to. But many Blacks in this country are so displaced, and so we've had to create communities. I think that's one of the beautiful things about many marginalized groups. We form community. So going back to like conversation that we had about, you saw like the Filipinos here and then like the Blacks here. We find each other collectively and try and create safe spaces in perceived and real dangerous times. And I think that is a beautiful aspect of our communities. And at the same time, right? So much of our history has already been taken, and we're seeing it now where history is being undone. It is being rewritten, unwritten, wiped away. And I don't even know how to begin to describe that level of pain. We were just getting caught up with all the history that we thought we could find, and now we're right back into the same cycle of just having it taken away again. And I guess I'm curious as to your thoughts, and maybe from an educator standpoint, right? Because we're both educators, we're both professors, we both teach, and we teach social justice. What are some of the challenges in having to keep up a curriculum and teaching materials that are up to date, knowing that it's being simultaneously wiped away?
There's an active, as we speak, there's an active measure of fear that's within the academic community because, especially within the academic community, people of color. And it's like, so as academics, I don't know, we might be on a list somewhere, of dissenters or people who are unpatriotic or, all that stuff. But again, it's like, this is where white privilege and also patriarchal privilege plays a role. I don't have the same fears. You know what I mean? And where we start with that, and we start well, and this is really interesting too, because I'm reminded of something Malcolm X discussed, the idea of the being afraid of the white liberal, because we could talk a big game and we could say that we're in it for the right reasons, but then when push comes to shove, we recede into the background. We go back into our homes and we kind of like turn on TV and increase our comfort level. We can forget about all this stuff.
It's like a different level of the bystander effect, I think.
I think so, because it's like, well, and I get it too. It's hard, but that's the point. That's the fucking point, because people live with that difficulty every single day of their life. And so it's incumbent upon us. Did I use that word rightly? It feels like it's appropriate for us to remove our privileges and engage in the discomfort of the work, and to make ourselves as vulnerable as every member of our community so that we're sharing the load. And from my perspective, that's missing. We see that, and we actually saw that with post George Floyd and the uproar that happened and all the activity that took place. But as the pandemic waged on, and as that fight waged on, we saw less and less members of the white community engage in that dialogue and in creating change, and things went back to normal. And we became complacent, and that's the problem.
And complicit.
And complicit. Yes.
And complicit. And I will also say, I think in the complicity, it's a word now, if it's not.
I'm down.
I'm down. Okay. I've only had one cup of coffee today. It's rough. But in that, I think even marginalized groups, we became very tired. We became fed up with having to fight the fight. We're like, okay, everyone's given up at this point. And this is not to point a finger at any one individual or any one group, but to say, I mean, this is an exhausting process. And I will tell you, as a person of color and an educated person and a person who, has friends in the, as you call it, the white delegation, and people across, these cultural realms. You said something that I think is going to sound, or is sounding, really scary to white people, which is, we've got to remove our privileges.
Yeah. I mean, it's terrifying. But I mean, there's a book. Do I have it near me?
Your bookshelf looks like mine. Yeah.
There's no organization.
I'm like, I don't even know. I've got it, all of mine tabbed out, and it just it's insane.
What it's titled Black Fatigue, and it's talking about this very topic and the idea of the frustrations of living with these pressures every single day, and having the same conversations over and over again with members of the white delegation, and it becomes like this sort of like, tell me your story so I can learn from you, and it's damaging.
I think also it's, in my experience, and by no means am I speaking for everyone's experience, right? But tell me your story so that I can hear it and learn from you, so I can also go back and not listen to it and do anything about it.
Yeah. And that's why we have those same conversations over and over and over again. And as I'm learning, how in the shit can I see that a problem exists and not work towards making a change in that regard? And that's where the accountability piece, again, the accountability piece comes in, because once we become conscious of something, it's our responsibility to work on it.
Yeah. I can tell you, so I teach CPR, and, I remember just before I had my first class, I was like, oh man, like this, you try to memorize the stuff, right? Like you think back to your first day as a professor, and you're just like, okay, I got all my little lectures together, got my little PowerPoints together, right? And all right, I'm just going to remember day one, we're going to talk about the syllabus. We're going to talk about these things. I'm going to hit these bullet points. Now I just run off script. I'm like, you can read, do your thing. It's uploaded. But when it comes to education, it's not lost on me. Just the profound importance of what we do as clinicians, as what we do as educators. But I go back to my first real day, which was not so long ago, being a CPR instructor. And once I got past like my own ass about it, right? When I was like, oh God, it's so scary, I realized just how important and just how scary it was to make sure that I was teaching things correctly.
Yeah.
Right. And this idea of, once we know about something, it is our responsibility, it is our duty to step in and actually show compassion, show grace, intercede on the behalf of someone who may not be able to fend for themselves. And, ironically enough, we talk about, we talk about how individuals can't be sued if they give CPR, but there's also the idea of like, you don't have to. I don't know why I would ever get credentialed to not give CPR,
right?
Unless, they tell you to assess the situation, they tell you to make sure that the environment is safe, because you also can't be the person, right? You have to put your mask on first. You have to make sure the environment is safe so that you can intervene, right? And so we and this idea that like we're not held accountable if we intervene. But why would you ever want to, knowing that you have these skills, knowing that you have a platform, knowing that you have the ability to save someone's life? Why would you not?
It's an obligation.
Yeah.
It's an
but
obligation.
Why would you not? Why would you not fulfill it?
Yeah. And I have to say, I used to teach CPR too.
Of course, you were an EMT, of course. Just badass all over. Oh my gosh. So cool. So cool.
The more I learn from you, the more I appreciate. That's so awesome. Wow. But you're absolutely right, though. Why wouldn't anyone? And it comes to like fear, discomfort. Maybe we're sitting with our own biases that we're not owning up to, because these conversations come up. It's like, I don't want to give CPR to that person because they're a homeless guy. They're drunk, and they're just gonna, X, Y, or Z. And it's just like, that's a human being.
Yes. That was someone, I like to frame it this way. That was and is someone's child.
Yeah.
That was someone's child. I am someone's child. And to overlook that, right? To qualify individuals based on this very obscure, uninformed mindset is horribly frustrating. It's horribly frustrating. And I think it contributes to pain. Also, just from a clinical standpoint, I think it contributes to things like PTSD and depression and anxiety and the perpetuation of transgenerational trauma and unhealed wounds. Because where do we go? What Band-Aid do we use?
Yeah.
Because, you know, what ointment do we put on an invisible wound?
Yeah.
And it's
that's a great metaphor. And please forgive me for cutting you off, because that the idea of it being an invisible wound, you know, a wound itself would require a bandage, would require, you know, restorative care. And that's exactly what's missing.
Yeah.
We're not healing the wound.
No. So 2 questions that are big, but I think we need to at least start the conversation so we don't keep having the same old conversations. I believe I'm of the school of thought, if no one else is going to do it, and see, there's someone's car alarm, so it's lovely. If other people are not going to be the Band-Aid and not going to be the ointment, then we have to step in. We've got to perform mental CPR.
Yeah.
And resuscitation. How can white people do it? How can marginalized groups do it? How can we support one another? And I mean really support one another without the onus being placed on any one group or several groups of individuals to be the ones to teach, for it to fall on deaf ears, for it to go nowhere, for us to write these bills and these laws that no one has read and no one will adhere to. How do we, in effect, become the ointment?
Yeah. I mean, and that's the question. And from my perspective, at least how I've approached that question with my life is, it's interesting because some of the most important lessons I've learned, the most damaging, the most constructive, and valuable, have been the lessons learned in the space between spaces. You know, we have the academic setting of class, you know, where the lesson plan and everything that we're supposed to learn in that space. Great. We're learning that. But how we interact with each other, those are the memories that stay with me, you know, like especially the emotional realities of those interactions. The teacher that talked down to me because I wasn't connecting with dots on 2 + 2, whatever that might have been, someone who made me feel othered in some way, shape, or form. Those lessons I carry with me today. And so coming back to the question is, how do we do this on a personal level? It's like we model a different way of doing business. Like as I teach, I care more about the lessons that someone's going to take with them that helps augment their personal professional practice. Not necessarily, I don't care about when they turn their assignment in, you know?
Yeah, I'm the same way. My students will tell you, I'm like, I don't care about deadlines. Just get it in by the end of the quarter.
Just get it done. I want to know how this improves the quality of your life. What lessons are you taking from this? And so we're as educators, we're changing the narrative in even in small ways. And I think that modeling behavior of like, we really can do things differently, how we interact with each other, the love and empathy, the unconditional positive regard as part of our personal practice. I think those are the lessons that people will carry with them, because those are the lessons being learned in the space between spaces.
Yeah, the space between spaces. I think that is so beautiful. You know, I had a podcast episode that talked about creativity. So my doom scrolling your dreams, and talked about how with continued scrolling, our brains just never come to that point of rest, right? And our brains need a sense of conclusion. And in order to create, some of the best creative ideas come out of boredom. out of those spaces between spaces. And I think that is where some of our best work too. I 100% wholeheartedly agree that some of our best work and some of the best community building can happen in those spaces, in those uncomfortable spaces,
Mm-hmm.
in those quiet spaces, you know, not in the spaces that are necessarily the most ostensible or the most well known. And I think it's important that we bring that to the table, right? Because neither you nor I can solve for X, and we definitely can't do it overnight, but we can make a small contribution, right? Like I can show, based on my education and all that, I don't have to be whitewashed,
Yes,
by the patriarchy, and I don't have to teach in ways that are insensitive to my students, right? So I can be a profound woman of color, educator, and all of that, and not lose the cultural sense of who I am, and I can still be taken seriously.
hell to the yes.
Yep.
Yep.
And then I think, with you don't have to come in and be, like the white man that's just like, oh, well, you know what, I just bow down.
Right?
Like you can also speak with authority, right? And say, hey, but also, accountability works on all sides. And I know this is probably going to piss a lot of people off, but I'm saying this with my whole chest here. We are all contributing to the problem.
We are.
Especially when we actively choose to do nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, and I just want to clear up, fighting with someone on social media about their political views also not helping, folks.
That's
also not helping.
it.
Cut it out.
Yeah.
Cut it out. That's and we're talking about, online bullying. And I think we have reduced that to what happens with like school-aged children and teenagers and stuff. Online bullying can happen across the board. And I think I've definitely seen some bullies on all sides. And that is also not helping. We can't yell from the mountaintops, this is a problem and someone needs to fix it, and also continue to contribute to the problem.
There's yes, 100%. And it's interesting because it sounds like, as we say something like, we're all contributing to the problem, which is absolutely true because we're all playing the game. But again, it comes back to how pervasive all this systemic oppression really is, because we're it's part of our DNA now. It's ingrained in how we think and feel about ourselves and the world around us. And so, like, how the shit do we do this? And I don't know.
I can think of ways we don't do it. And I think as an educator, I'd love for us to dialogue about this for about 20 seconds. Reading one book about a thing does not make you proficient. It does not make you competent in one particular area. I say this because I think between you and I, we've collectively read the entire New York Library, with our education. But we also have to understand that we are poor historians, right? As individuals, and that is just fact. What we understand about memory and working memory and memory over time and perception, all that, we're poor historians. But outside of that, books are left up to art and people's opinions, people's perceptions of things that occurred, which is why there is not one book about like one particular subject, right? So you could read 700 history books about, the Cold War, and all have different perspectives about that war, because it's all different, all different snapshots and different pieces of time. So one book doesn't do it, folks. Having conversations with, people of the opposite, and I don't even like opposite, right? Because that's still, we're already a bifurcated society in many ways, and trifurcated, quadfurcated, I don't know, like, all the little avenues. But speaking to someone and having conversations with people that are not of your same cultural background, also not enough, right? Especially if you're not willing to learn. And I want to challenge people and get your opinion on this. learning isn't just taking the information in. Learning is also application.
Yeah, it's the integration of it. Like, how do we? Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah.
Short answer. I agree.
Short answer. Yup. yup. Ding. Right. Just we're done. But and I say this, and I'm so strong in this thought that I think there are people that take in information, and they're like, oh, I learned about that, right? Like I could tell you many things about axolotls. It's one of my favorite animals. And if you don't know what an axolotl is, look it up. It is the cutest little ugly creature, and I love it with all my heart, right? But I can tell you everything that I have learned, but I've also never spoken to an axolotl, probably won't, because that, that doesn't make me an expert on it. And I don't think we're necessarily aiming to be experts in someone else's life. We think about Smith's book, Decolonizing Methodologies, and how our mere presence disrupts the very way that people live their lives. And that we can change just by being present. We disrupt the very fabric and fiber of people's existence. So doing research isn't really research. And I think we also have to be very mindful that in educational systems, what I like to teach my students is that you're gonna get a lot of information thrown at you. Real learning is deciphering from all of that information how to truly, compassionately, holistically, spiritually, positively impact the lives of everyone.
A lot of thoughts are coming to the forefront. And
do it.
So there's, I think I lost my train of thought all of a sudden. But it's like, may I share a story really quick?
Please do.
So it was like late 80s, early 90s. I'm listening to a broad range of music, and I'm introduced to groups like Living Colour, Public Enemy, NWA, Ice Cube. And at first, what's really interesting, going back to like the idea of how we steal culture through
everything,
through media and that sort of thing, and we just start to pretend, use the language and all this other stuff, and it's just but we're not listening to the stuff, right?
Tupac especially, who had some pretty profound lyrics about
pretty important things to say. And I come back to what a lot of folks from my community were talking about as that music gained popularity, or those artists gained some momentum, is this fear. And it's perfectly titled Fear of a Black Planet from Public Enemy. But it's this fear that Black people hate white people. And they just want to cause violence and da-da-da-da-da-da. All these things that are being said, these fears from the white community. But we're not really listening to the music. We're not really listening to what's being said. And as I think about artists like Living Colour, my favorite artists of all time, Living Colour is one of the most influential music groups of my life, period. And in their second album, Time's Up, there's two tracks. One is called History Lesson. And it's really not a song, but it's a collection of voices, and with statements like, we are wearing the names of our masters. Music is not an art form so much as it is a means of communication. Talking about what it means to be Black in the United States. And what's interesting about that is, okay, that's not my community. So what do I do? Hit next on the track, or do I listen to what's being said? And that gives me an opportunity to learn from others' lived experience. And I wasn't connecting the dots back in 1991 when that was released. But the next track after that is a track called Pride. And they're saying things like, relate to me as me, not what you see on TV. Talking about how we we love their hair, we love their music, we love the culture of it all, but we're dehumanizing at the same time. That track, when I first listened to it, I had a pit of anxiety in my stomach. Oh, I don't know how I feel about this song. And sometimes I hit next on the track. But the more I listen to it, the more I realize that it's a message to me, not just me as an individual, but to me as part of the white community that has been a part of causing so much pain. And so I guess coming back to the question is, we have to be willing to learn about others' lived experience by removing the fear that we have inside with our own discomfort. And if we're able to do that, we can actually sit with our own stuff, and then engage in the dialogue that's being shared. So that way we can, how do I say this? There's in Washington State, there's it's a program called Camp Chaparral. It's a program hosted by the Yakama Nation, and what's really interesting is for veterans and for those who work with veterans, and it's like a week-long retreat. And so folks go out and they engage in this, and every single night they sit in a circle and they share stories. And one of the most important qualities about that is not so much just to share our story to be heard, but it's so that the community can take ownership of the story and carry the weight of that story as well. So it becomes a shared
storytelling and acceptance. I think what I keep hearing, and that just keeps like bap, is acceptance. So with learning, right, about other people's stories and experiences, it is accepting that those are their experiences. And that is key, right? I mean, there is nothing that will shut me down faster than that's not what you experienced. That's not what you, and I just mean this like as a woman, right? If you're part of any marginalized group, or any group that is not, like a white thriving male in this country, your experience is often cast aside, and that can't be your experience, because racism is dead. And look, you have more opportunity. I mean, okay, thanks for that affirmative action stuff. But I think about it, and I think maybe that's the piece, right? Not, and I want to clear this up. Acceptance does not mean you agree.
Yeah. Yes. That's so powerful. It's true, because we feel like we have to. I think Spock said it best from Star Trek. I disagree with it, but I understand. And it's just, we don't have to accept. Blah 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 blah. We don't have to agree, but we have to accept the truth of others' lived realities.
Yes.
You're so right.
It's difficult. I think it's super difficult because, I think this is part of why we have seen just like I don't want to say uptick. This is probably incorrect, but for women and men and trans individuals, trans persons and other marginalized groups who've experienced, interpersonal violence, sexual assault, things like that, when they're dismissed. And it's just like, well, where were you and what time? And that's not classified as rape and blah, blah, blah. What we're doing is we're enforcing and then reinforcing people to not come forward. We do the same things when it comes to marginalized groups and people of color and, individuals with disabilities, both visibly and invisibly. When we discount their experiences and we say, there's no way that could happen, or they tell you to try to do something that is futile, right?
They start to problem solve for you. It's like,
like I tell people all the time, I'm like, okay, you telling me that might be your experience of how you do it. If I tried that, I could be met with a very different consequence, which could be fatal.
That's true, and that speaks to the privilege of it all. It's like, that's part of it, right? So yes, I agree.
I wasn't trying to shut you down. It's just, it's my brain does that. It just kind of goes in these directions of like, because for me, you know, where I'm a problem solver and I want to solve the problem and I know I can't do it by myself. And half the time I'm like, I don't even know if am I doing it? Am I helping? Am I contributing? Because my very existence, I just want to help people.
Yeah.
Right? I just want to help people at the end of the day, all backgrounds, all cultures, all, you know, sexes and genders and creeds and walks of life. I just want to help people. But I realize in helping people, there needs to be an acknowledgement of different experiences. And I think we're definitely lacking there. We're definitely lacking. Before we can even get to acceptance, we got to acknowledge that there is an existence, an experience that is different from our own. And I think that's where I see us falling short. And it sounds like that's what you're seeing too.
I think so. And I think it's embodied too. It's interesting, the response to the Trump administration this time around. And there's a lot of talk of fascism. And, you know, a lot of white voices are coming up and are speaking out against fascism. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, fascism has existed in the United States day one, since before day one. And it's just it's what's convenient for us to talk about. And I think I lost track of my point in why I was going through here, but it's the acknowledgement. And so as we're doing this, we're not acknowledging the truth that fascism has existed before. And we're only speaking up now because it's inconvenience for it. We're being inconvenienced. It's a problem for us. And so now it's important. But for fuck's sake, it's been important always.
Always.
And it's been ignored. Always.
Yeah. And I think, you know, we owe several debts of gratitude. I know even as a person from the non-white delegation, we owe debts of gratitude to the people before us, the indigenous peoples,
100.
The individual peoples, you know, whose lands that we now inhabit, to our peoples of color, to our mothers, for their blood, for the cost, the heavy debt that they paid on our behalf, both willingly, unwillingly, and in between. And this is a subject that I think we need to continue to talk about. We're not going to hash it out in one day. No one forum is going to do it. No, I don't even think just a series is going to do this, right? And I think you and I, in this conversation, I think we're just getting started. And it's beautiful to watch. And at the same time, you know, I think as educators, as two highly educated individuals working towards the same mission and greater good, you know, vastly different experiences, different approaches, but attacking, you know, the same issues. I think there's still a lot of fear, right? Maybe on both sides. There's a lot of fear that I have speaking out about, you know, about this, in my own reflection about my experience and my, you know, my testimony about being and feeling invalidated, even by people in my own community. And I can only imagine too, when you are an ally, if you call yourself an ally, you represent that within your community as well, experiencing that othering that can happen within our own communities. And it makes, I think, our jobs and our missions that much harder to fulfill.
I agree with you 100%. It feels like we're getting close to the end of the conversation, but I feel like, and I'm not saying that to rush, because I'm enjoying this, but mindful of your time. But
no, that's okay.
It feels important to say, and this is something many members of the white delegation might not want to hear, but the truth of the fact is, the greatest patriots of the United States have always been people of color. And the greatest patriots of the United States have been the Black community. always.
Mm-hmm.
And without the contributions of the Black community in particular, this country wouldn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be what it is today. It wouldn't be as influential or as powerful. And I think that's important to pay attention to here, because it's kind of goes back to the acceptance, you know, and it's something that we don't want to acknowledge. And I think that's, I don't know why it feels important to say that at this moment, but it feels necessary because it's the truth.
I think the feeling that I get and what I've always thought is, Blacks have definitely contributed so much and have helped, to build this nation. And I would also say, immigrants as well. And I think the importance and the timeliness of what you just said is because we're living in a time now where the rights and the freedoms and the privileges of these particular groups, they're being walked back. And I think we've stopped asking why. And that is such an interesting place to be, right? At this point, we know why.
Yeah.
But the question is, what happens next? And we go right back to that beginning question of, what do we do now? What happens next? And I don't know that there's a clean answer.
I don't think there is a clean answer, because I'm reminded of listening to a speech from Martin Luther King. I remember him talking about the difference, the idea of passivity with a nonviolent approach. And he's really highlighting the complexities of that approach, because it's not taking up arms against the oppressor. But what's fascinating about that is the mere fact of that nonviolent approach is an assault on the conscience of the psyche of the oppressor. They don't even know what to do with that. And so as a result, they're resorting to violence to do what we know how to do. But he's also talking about, just because I'm using a nonviolent approach doesn't mean I'm okay with everything. I'm angry. We have a right to be angry about this.
Yes.
And I think we have to acknowledge the fact that, we're fucking pissed off. And it's okay to be pissed off, and it's okay to be angry, and it's okay to move forward with love and empathy.
Yes. Yes. Oh, you know what, Dr. Hollander, we could talk about this forever. And I am just so gravely, deeply grateful for people like you, for the work that you do, for the knowledge that you continue to invest in, for the work that you do with your students, for your social justice, reform, for your mindset, for your love, for your compassion. And I can't say this enough, because we all need support. We all need love. We all need grace. And we all just want to be heard. And I think today, a lot of people were heard because of you and because of this conversation. And so I can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough for being here. I can't thank you enough for your time. And we have to do this again. We got to get a panel going, and just we got to talk this one out, and we got to just solve for world peace. We got to go back to our childhood dreams of world peace and all those wonderful things.
For serious, so I would love that. That would be awesome.
Yes. Well, this is the wonderful thing about, I think, this time. There's so much to say. There's so much that we need to talk about. And we're going to continue these conversations. Like I said at the beginning, these are real conversations with real people about real things, rooted in growth and healing and purpose. So, on that note, I want to thank everybody, and I want to thank my amazing guest, Dr. Jeremy Hollander, for being with us today. If this resonated with you, please share this with somebody who, you think would benefit from it, might need to hear it. Please follow, share this podcast. And, until next time, please, please, please stay rooted in who you are and keep rising into who you're becoming. Take care.
Thank you.